Hello, and welcome back. Or, if this is your first time here, welcome in. This isn't a place that shouts. This isn't a channel that rushes. This is a quiet space. A kind space. A place where stories aren't told to teach or to warn, but simply to be felt. You've arrived in a small corner of the world called Sleep Without Ending. And here, we don't push the world away. We just let it soften. We let it blur gently around the edges until the only thing left is presence and breath and story. So take a moment. Let the outside sounds fade into a gentle background hum. Loosen your grip on the day or the night, or the thoughts still trying to speak to you. You don't have to listen to them right now. You don't have to do anything at all. This isn't a story you need to follow closely. It won't test your memory or your logic. It doesn't ask you to solve anything. In fact, there's nothing to fix here. Nothing to finish. Only a moment to step into. And slowly drift. You might be lying in bed. Or maybe curled up on a couch with dim light beside you. Maybe your eyes are already half closed. Or maybe you're just letting the silence unfold behind your thoughts. However you're here, you're welcome. Tonight's story will come like a fog. Not heavy. Not confusing. Just gentle. It will settle into the corners of your room and drift softly through the air like candle smoke that's forgotten its flame. There will be places in the story that feel like memories, even though you've never been there. There will be voices that speak in quiet gestures and moments where nothing is explained, only felt. There will be a space for you to rest, not just physically but mentally. You won't have to keep up. You won't have to wonder what happens next. It will all come on its own, in its time. Here, we believe in softness. In story not as entertainment, but as sanctuary. Not every tale has to lead to a grand ending. Some stories are like rivers. They carry you gently, not toward a destination, but into yourself. And in that current, you may fall asleep. You may not even notice when you do. That's okay. That's the point. This channel isn't about clicks or pace. It's not about drama or twist endings. It's not made to keep you awake. It's made to help you let go. But still, if these stories have brought you even a moment of calm, if they've helped you find your breath or feel the comfort of quiet, then I gently ask, consider subscribing. Not for my sake, but so that next time sleep feels far away, this corner will be waiting for you. So you don't have to search for calm in a noisy world. It'll already be here. If something in tonight's story lingers with you, even just a sentence, even just a feeling, leave a comment. Tell me what you felt. Or tell me nothing. A dot, a word, a thank you, or even silence. I read them all. Quietly. And if you like what you hear, leave a like. Not as a transaction. Just as a breath, a small echo in the stillness that says, I was here. I rested. Now, take a deep breath. In and out. Let your shoulders soften. Let the muscles in your face release the day. Let your eyes, if they are still open, blink once. Then again. And then let go of needing to listen. Let the story carry you like waves that don't crash, only sway. We're about to begin a tale not of heroes or villains. Not of battles or betrayal. But of quiet things. Forgotten places. And moments that might not make sense, but might still feel like home. Let your imagination wander like footsteps through an old room. Let your thoughts flicker like candlelight on the edge of sleep. There will be no loud music, no sudden shifts, only a voice, only a rhythm, only rest. So if you're ready, not to be thrilled, but to be held, then stay. You're in the right place. This is where the story begins, where the waking world dims, and the silence deepens. The door with no handle. There are certain things in old houses that go unnoticed until someone begins to live slowly. Not visit, not stay a night or two, but truly live. Walk barefoot in the early morning chill. Touch the walls without reason. Let the stillness become familiar, even welcome. Only then do you notice what shouldn't be there, and what always has been. The house in this story wasn't old in the usual sense. It hadn't been passed down for generations, nor had it been abandoned and reclaimed. It simply was. As if the land allowed it to be there, and time had forgotten to change it. And in the back of this house, Past the long hallway that side when walked through, stood a door. It was easy to miss at first. Tucked to the side, a quiet alcove near the last window, it didn't call attention to itself. No markings. No unusual frame. No carvings or contrast in color. Just a flat wooden panel, built flush into the wall like a secret that never cared whether it was found. But once noticed, it became impossible to ignore. It had no handle, no knob, no keyhole, just the faint outline of a door where one should be, and the sense that something waited quietly on the other side. At first, the inhabitants of the house, whoever they happened to be at the time, would ignore it. A door without a handle didn't demand attention. It was easy to write off as decorative or accidental. But over time, something about it asked for curiosity. Not urgently, not even intentionally, but like a forgotten tune you can't quite place, the door had a rhythm. And sometimes, just before sleep, one would notice. It was open, not wide, just slightly, as if someone had gone through and forgot to close it all the way. And in the morning, always shut tight again. No sound, no creak, just open at night, closed by dawn. Of course, the rational thing was to assume a trick of the eye. Or perhaps the way the wood swelled in the cool night air and settled again with the sun. That's what people said. Until they began to dream. The dreams were not frightening. That's important. They were not filled with monsters or sharp memories. They were soft. Like walking through a thought that wasn't yours, but one you'd always known. In those dreams, the door was always open. And beyond it, a room not made of walls, but of hush. A space where sounds floated instead of echoing. Where your steps didn't disturb the floor, but were absorbed by it. And sometimes, just sometimes, there was a table, a chair, a single folded piece of cloth. Always something different, yet always in the same place. And the dream always ended the same way. You turned to look at the door from the inside, and it had vanished. People began keeping journals. Not out of fear, but fascination. Some believed the door was a shared dream. Others thought it was the house itself, gently introducing its history one night at a time. A memory not of bricks and beams, but of feeling. One person, a woman named Alara, began sleeping in the hallway outside the door. Not to guard it, just to be near it. She said it made her breathing slow, that she dreamed more vividly, that in her dreams, she sometimes heard the sound of someone exhaling behind the door, as if both of them had settled into sleep at the same moment. She left behind pages of notes. None of them had conclusions. Only questions, observations, and the feeling that the door was less a passage and more a listener. One rainy evening, a visitor came. They weren't told about the door. No one ever mentioned it. Not out of secrecy, but because it felt like something private. Like telling a stranger about your favorite scent or the way you hum to yourself in the dark. But on their second night in the house, the visitor woke around 2 a.m. They couldn't say why. There was no sound, no light, just the unmistakable feeling of having been watched, not with threat, but with presence. They walked the hallway slowly, barefoot. Their hand brushed the wall, trailing along familiar lines. And when they reached the alcove, the door was open. For a long time, they stood still, not afraid, just listening. And after several minutes of silence, they whispered a greeting, not expecting an answer, but somehow offering one. Then they sat down beside the door, leaned gently against the frame, and fell asleep there. When morning came, they remembered nothing of what they dreamed, but they remembered waking with a single word in their mind. Continue. The door never changed. Never opened wider, never closed loudly. It simply remained. And those who lived with it began to understand. It didn't want to be opened. It wanted to be noticed. To be known, not solved. It was part of the house, yes, but also part of its rhythm. Like the way the floor creaked in apology. The way the windows let in light even when shut. The way the whole structure seemed to lean slightly inward, as if always listening. And those who stayed longest began to shift. Their pace slowed, their sleep deepened, their dreams lengthened. And though no one could ever recall what they dreamed exactly, they always woke with the feeling that something very old had nodded to them in the dark. Some visitors spoke of hearing music, not music in the usual sense, but a deep and distant hum, like a memory that vibrated just beneath their thoughts. Others swore they saw shadows that lingered longer than they should, not menacingly, but curiously. And every once in a while, someone would describe a scent, faint, like lavender mixed with old wood and rain. A scent they could never quite place. And still the door stood, as still as ever. There were theories. There are always theories. Some thought the door was a portal, but not to another place, rather, to another version of oneself. A place you could visit in dreams, but only when your heart was quiet and your intentions unspoken. Others believed the door wasn't a door at all, but a mirror that showed nothing physical. Instead, it reflected who you were beneath your roles, your names, your stories. The you that lingered when all else had faded. Alara once wrote, "The door doesn't let you in. It lets you return." Children grew up in the house. Some noticed the door, others never did. And those who did were never told to stay away, but they rarely touched it more than once. There was a kind of agreement unspoken that the door was not for playing, not for exploring. It was for knowing. Quietly. Patiently. One child, an 11-year-old named Mateo, drew the door in his notebook over and over again. Sometimes with a forest behind it. Sometimes with stars. Sometimes with nothing at all. When asked why, he simply said, "It feels like something I'll walk through when I'm older." He's an old man now, but he still dreams of the door, still draws it, and says that every time he does, he feels less afraid of whatever comes next. And that, perhaps, is what the door has always been. Not a mystery to solve, but a presence to accept. A part of life that doesn't explain itself, but walks beside you anyway. Not opened with hands, but with stillness. Not entered, but remembered. The door with no handle remains in its alcove. Soft. Quiet. Waiting. And perhaps, right now, somewhere deep in your own mind, you can feel it, too. The room that didn't exist on the plans. It was never part of the blueprints. Not sketched in pencil or ink. Not whispered about in the notes left behind by architects or whispered stories passed down by tradesmen. The plans for the house were, by all professional accounts, complete. Every window accounted for. Every stair. Every beam. And yet, the room was there. It wasn't hidden. Not behind false walls or under trapdoors. It simply didn't appear until it did. Most people never noticed it. Why would they? Rooms are only sought when there's a need, a reason. But those who stayed in the house long enough, who allowed themselves to slow down, to sink into the rhythm of creaking floorboards and the subtle hush of shifting daylight, eventually found it. Or perhaps it found them. The room appeared near the back of the house, tucked between the kitchen and the servants' stair. A space that didn't align with the rest. Narrow, yet long. Lit by a high, thin window that didn't seem to exist from the outside. And it was always empty. Perfectly, peacefully empty. No furniture. No markings. No dust. As if it had been waiting. The first recorded account of the room came from a man named Halwyn, who had taken residence in the house in early spring. He was a painter, not of grand portraits or commissioned frescoes, but of slow, repetitive studies of light and shadow. For years, he lived among canvases and coffee cups, sleeping little and speaking less. One morning, after a particularly long night of sketching by candlelight, he noticed a shift. A new doorway. Not wide, nor ornate. Just a sliver of space along the stone passage where before there had only been solid wall. He assumed it was a trick of fatigue, a distortion of shadow. But when he reached out, his fingers met wood. A door. Unmarked. Silent. He opened it gently, expecting a pantry perhaps, or a broom closet. But beyond it lay a long, pale room lit by winter light. The air was cool but not cold. The silence was not emptiness, but softness. Halwyn stepped inside and stood very still. He later wrote in his notebook, "I have never known a space to listen before. This room did not echo. It absorbed. It received. It was not haunted, but present." He began spending an hour there each day. Not painting. Not thinking. Just being. And the more he visited, the more he changed. His work grew calmer, softer, less about detail and more about feeling. He never told anyone about the room. Not because it was a secret, but because it felt like something you didn't interrupt with words. Years later, after Halwyn had long since moved on, a woman named Emma arrived. She was an archivist, sent to catalog the many forgotten objects left in the attic and cellar. She slept in a small room off the kitchen, rising early to sort through old papers, faded fabric, and jars filled with buttons and twine. Emma did not believe in unrecorded spaces. Until the fifth morning. When she stepped into the hallway beside the stairwell, there it was, a door she had never seen before. Thin, soft-colored, almost blending into the wall. She blinked, touched it, opened it, and there was the room. Still, empty, bright. She walked in slowly, notebook in hand. The wooden floor made no sound beneath her boots. The window light was golden, though the sky outside was cloudy. She wrote down every detail she could. Size: approximately 12 by 4 meters. Orientation: east-west. Contents: none. Floor: smooth wood, no signs of wear. Walls: pale, unadorned, no fixtures. She visited the room every morning for 2 weeks. Always it was the same. Always it made her chest feel lighter, her spine straighter. One day, she brought in a chair to sit. When she returned the next day, the chair was gone. She thought she'd imagined bringing it. But her journal showed a small sketch she had made of it in the room. The room, it seemed, preferred its emptiness. Others found it after her. A musician recovering from an injury. A teacher grieving her mother. A boy who rarely spoke but who spent hours with his hand resting gently against the room's far wall. And for each of them, the room offered something different. But never in objects, never in signs, just in presence. It was a room that seemed to reflect your inner pace. If you entered hurriedly, distracted, it seemed smaller, duller. If you walked in gently, aware, it felt vast, soaring. Light poured in from nowhere, from everywhere. The boy once said to his father, "When I sit in that room, I feel like time is breathing with me." Then for months it was gone. No door. No sign. The hallway returned to plainness. The rhythm of the house rebalanced. Until one day, a new resident moved in, a poet recovering from heartbreak. And one night, while walking in the half-dark with a candle stub in her hand, she stumbled slightly against a wall she thought she knew. Only it wasn't a wall. It was a door. The room had returned. She wrote every night in there. Long, quiet pages. She said it felt like the room pulled the words from her gently, without asking. When she left the house a year later, she left behind only one note. "I came here with too many questions." The room didn't answer them. It just reminded me how to ask softly. To this day, no one knows why the room appears. Or to whom. It never shows up on plans. Builders have torn apart the wall where it once stood, only to find stone, seamless, solid. Electricians have mapped the wiring of the house and found nothing out of place. And yet, those who have seen the room never forget it. They speak of it like a memory, not a place. A stillness inside a home. A listening without judgment. A space that made them feel like the world had paused just long enough for them to exhale. And perhaps that is all the room ever wanted to be. Not a secret. Not a mystery. Just a moment. Waiting to be noticed. Waiting to be stepped into, gently, quietly, and only when you are ready. And if you find yourself in a house like that, walking through it with a thoughtful step and a quiet heart, look carefully between the kitchen and the stair. You may find a door where none was before. And behind it, the room that didn't exist on the plans. Waiting. Just for you. The mirror that vanished in the morning. It was the kind of mirror that didn't call attention to itself. No gilded frame. No carved flowers. Just a flat surface, tall and slender, leaning gently against the wall at the end of the upstairs corridor. But it was only ever there at dawn. The first light of the day would touch it like a promise, glinting softly off the glass as if it had been waiting all night for this moment. And just as the sun crested the edge of the east-facing window, Just as it truly began to brighten the hallway, the mirror would be gone. Not shattered. Not stolen. Simply not there. By full morning, the space it had occupied was always bare. The wall behind it showed no marks. No outline. Not even a dust shadow to betray that something had leaned there at all. It was a vanishing. And yet, those who had seen the mirror always remembered it. Not just what it looked like, but how it felt. As though it had shown them something they weren't supposed to see. Not in their reflection, but in themselves. The mirror had no known origin. No one could say who brought it to the house or when. It didn't appear on any inventories or letters. No photo captured it. No artist had painted it. It was spoken of only by those who had woken early enough, or wandered late enough, to find it standing in quiet stillness. One of the earliest accounts came from a boy named Simon, who stayed in the house one summer when he was 10. He had a habit of waking just before the sky lightened, padding softly through the house in his socks. He said the world felt kinder in those minutes before morning fully arrived. That's when he saw the mirror. He described it as tall, almost the height of a grown man, with edges that faded into the air rather than ended. He stood in front of it and waved. His reflection waved back. But then it smiled before he did. Simon wasn't frightened. He said it felt like meeting an old friend you'd forgotten you had. When he came back the next morning to see it again, the mirror was gone. He told the adults, who dismissed it as a dream. But years later, as a grown man, he returned to the house and found it again. Only this time, the reflection didn't wave. It simply watched. And Simon left the house quietly the next day. A woman named Clara kept a journal of her visits to the mirror. She stayed in the house during the late autumn months, arriving just as the leaves began to fall. Clara was recovering from a long illness, and her physician had recommended rest, silence, and solitude. The house, with its whispering stairs and ever-changing light, was perfect. On her third morning, just before 6 a.m., she saw the mirror. Her first entry about it read, "Found a mirror today where no mirror had been yesterday. It shows me, not as I am, but as I feel. Tired, tender, transparent." Each day, she woke earlier, sat quietly in front of the mirror with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a small cup of tea. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she smiled. Often she said nothing. After 2 weeks, she stopped journaling entirely. When she left the house, she packed only a small satchel. Her final note, left tucked between the floorboards beneath where the mirror stood, said only, "I don't know who it belongs to, but thank it for me." One day, a young scholar tried to capture the mirror. Not steal it, just understand it. His name was Devrin. He specialized in historical anomalies, forgotten buildings, unexplained artifacts, and places that behaved as if they had memories of their own. He had heard whispers of the house and its quiet mysteries and convinced the caretakers to let him stay for a month. He set up cameras, placed small motion detectors, marked the walls with chalk. The first few days, nothing happened. Then, just as the sky began to glow one morning, the mirror was there. Devrin saw it clearly, recorded it with his own eyes. He reached out, and the mirror's surface shimmered faintly. Not like glass, but like water remembering how to be still. He wrote pages and pages of notes. But when he reviewed the footage later, there was nothing there. Just an empty hallway. Even the chalk marks he had drawn on the wall had been erased. And so, Devrin stayed up the next night. And the next. And the next. But the mirror didn't return. Not for him. People began to speculate. Not out of fear, but out of wonder. What was the mirror? A relic? A trick of the house? Or something older, more subtle? Some said it showed you the version of yourself that lived in dreams. Others claimed it reflected your thoughts, not your form. One poet described it as a mirror that shows you only when you're truly alone. Whatever the explanation, the experience was always the same. It only appeared briefly. It never frightened. And it left behind a strange calm, like something had been acknowledged. Something deeply true. Visitors started to arrive with hope in their eyes and sleep in their bones. But the mirror was never summoned. It never appeared for those who sought it. only for those who wandered by accident or who had forgotten to look at all. One girl, barely 9, saw it on a cloudy morning as she chased a cat through the hall. She stopped, startled, looked into it, and then laughed. She later told her parents, "I saw myself older, with silver hair, but I wasn't old. I was just finished." She never explained what that meant, but her parents said she was quieter after that. Not sad, just settled. And always the pattern repeated. The mirror appeared before full light, never after. And by the time the day had truly begun, it was gone. Those who saw it were never quite the same. Not changed, not transformed, but deepened, as if something inside them had stood up and been seen. And perhaps that's all the mirror ever wanted to do. Not reflect, not mimic, but reveal, gently, briefly, at just the right time, and then disappear into the morning, until it was needed again. The clock that didn't keep time. It was not the grand kind of clock. Not gilded or towering or carved with oak leaves and lion faces. It was simple, round, wooden, and a little worn along the edges. The sort of thing you might walk past without a second glance. It hung near the foot of the stairs in a part of the house that was always cool. Not cold, not damp, just cool, in the way of forgotten spaces that have settled into quiet. Above it, a window let in thin light filtered through ivy. Below it, the stair creaked only once per step, as if remembering every foot that had walked there before. The clock had no brand, no signature, and no ticking sound. But still, the hands moved. Or at least, they seemed to, because the strangest thing was that they never kept the same time. At 6 a.m., they might show midnight. By lunch, they might pause entirely, as if thinking. Some visitors insisted the clock had no glass, only shadow. Others swore it was broken. And yet, those who spent time near it often found themselves feeling different. Not disoriented, not confused, just outside the usual, outside of time. The earliest person to note the clock was a man named Elric. He was a carpenter by trade and had come to the house to repair a cracked step. He was not a poet, nor a dreamer. He believed in weight, measure, and grain. But as he passed the clock on his way down the staircase, he paused. Just once. He glanced at it and saw the hands pointing backward. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly drifting in reverse, like a tide retreating. He blinked, looked again. Now it was midnight, but the room was filled with sunlight. He laughed to himself, shook his head, and kept walking. But later, when he checked his watch, he found that nearly an hour had passed, though it felt like only minutes. He returned the next day, not to finish the work that had been done, but to see the clock. He sat on the stairs near it and watched. Nothing changed. The hands did not move. But Elric later wrote in his notebook, "There is a kind of breathing near that clock. Not sound, not wind, but the feeling you get when someone is listening. Kindly, quietly, waiting." After him came Anya, a writer recovering from long weeks of overwork. She had come to the house to rest, to step away from the schedule of deadlines and digital reminders. She found herself sitting near the clock every morning with a blanket and a mug of weak tea. She didn't watch it, not directly, but she noticed that whenever she sat nearby, her mind became less tangled. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts began to unspool, like ribbons untying themselves. She never once checked the hour while she was in the house. And yet, she never missed a meal, never felt hurried. Time, she later wrote in her journal, seems to sigh here. It releases its grip, as though it knows you need rest and agrees to wait. Over the years, others came and went. None touched the clock. None tried to fix it. No one wounded it. There was no keyhole, no pendulum beneath, just the face, the hands, and the quiet space around it. But everyone who stayed in the house long enough had their own moment with the clock. A boy with insomnia sat beside it for 3 nights and finally fell asleep for the first time in weeks. A woman grieving her sister whispered stories to it, saying it helped her remember. An elderly man placed a photo beneath it and sat quietly for hours, smiling without reason. And always, The time on the clock was different. Always wrong. Always exactly what it needed to be. Once, a curious professor tried to map its movements. He charted every minute, watched it closely, even placed a camera on it for 3 weeks. But the recordings were strange. Sometimes the clock moved as expected. Other times, it jumped ahead by hours. And sometimes the camera showed only blur, like fog had crept into the lens. He eventually gave up. But he left behind a note tucked into the paneling. This clock doesn't count time. It holds it. It lets it stretch, pause, breathe. It offers a kind of mercy. Children, especially, seemed drawn to the clock. They'd sit near it with their dolls or books, whisper secrets, or make quiet jokes. One girl claimed that the clock hummed to her. A boy said it made his memories feel softer, like feathers instead of stones. None were afraid of it, and none remembered the exact time it showed. Because when you sat near it, time wasn't measured in minutes. It was measured in moments. There was a story passed among the house's caretakers, never written, only told in quiet kitchens late at night. It was about a man who arrived with a suitcase and sorrow so heavy it bent his spine. He said nothing to anyone, ate little, spoke less. He sat near the clock every evening, his back against the wall, eyes closed. And after 3 weeks, he left. But the wall where he'd leaned smelled faintly of pine for days afterward. And the clock didn't move for a week, as if it, too, had paused. Out of respect. So what is this clock? Not a keeper of time, but a listener. A quiet presence. A space where time is not demanded, but released. Some say it only works in that house. That if you moved it, it would simply stop. Others believe the house built itself around the clock, that it was always there, waiting. You cannot measure it. You cannot fix it. But you can sit beside it. And in that sitting, in that quiet acknowledgement, you might feel something soften. You might feel a slowing, not of the world, but of the weight you carry within it. And in that softness, you may find that time has not left you behind. It has simply stepped aside, to let you breathe, to let you be, just for a little while longer, until you're ready to move again. And when you do, the clock will still be there, not keeping time, but keeping you. The forgotten garden that bloomed at midnight. In a quiet corner of an old estate, hidden behind crumbling stone walls, lay a garden unlike any other. Not grand or ornate, but small, secret, and cloaked in a mystery that time had nearly forgotten. This garden slept through the daylight hours, its petals tightly furled, its leaves folded inward as if shielding itself from the sun's harsh gaze. By day, the garden was a muted mosaic of green and brown, quiet and still, as if resting under a protective spell. The air held the faint scent of earth and moss, but no hint of the vibrant blooms that would soon reveal themselves. But as the world settled into night, as shadows stretched and the moon climbed high, the garden stirred to life. Flowers that had been silent and closed by day would slowly unfurl, their delicate petals shimmering with an ethereal glow. The scent of jasmine and lavender, mingled with something elusive and ancient, filled the air in a soft, soothing breath. This was a garden that bloomed only at midnight, a secret dance between darkness and light, whispered in silence. The earliest known guardian of this garden was an elderly gardener named Matteo. Years ago, when the house was still lived in and full of laughter, Matteo tended its grounds with care. But as time passed and the house was abandoned, the garden became a forgotten patch of wildness. One autumn evening, Matteo returned, driven by a memory he could not shake. The gate that once opened with ease was now sealed by rusted iron, but with gentle effort, he pushed it aside. The garden lay still, bathed in the soft golden light of dusk, a quiet place waiting to be remembered. He settled on a worn stone bench, the one he had carved with his own hands decades before, and waited as the stars took their places. At midnight, Matteo witnessed the miracle he had come to see. The flowers awakened, petals unfolding like tiny lanterns in the dark. He described it as a silent ballet, the blooms moving with a grace that spoke of secrets older than memory. Some flowers opened fully, glowing softly as if lit from within, while others revealed only a shy glimpse of color before closing again. Mateo stayed for hours, drinking in the quiet magic of the night garden. For him, it was not just a place of beauty, but a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to pause and breathe with the rhythm of the moon. Mateo was not alone in his discovery. Years later, a woman named Elise, weary from sorrow, found her way to the garden. Grief had settled heavy on her heart, and the world outside had become too loud, too sharp. She wandered through the house one evening, drawn by a faint fragrance carried on the breeze. The garden gate appeared as if by invitation, and she stepped inside. The garden greeted her in silence, its blooms still folded tight beneath the stars. Elise sat quietly among the plants, her tears falling like gentle rain on the earth. As midnight approached, the garden began its nightly awakening. Flowers blossomed around her, petals glowing with moonlight's tender touch. The scents wrapped around her, soothing the ache in her chest. Elise felt her sorrow soften, wrapped in the garden's quiet embrace. She later said, "The night spoke to me here, not with words, but with the language of light and scent. It told me to rest, to heal, to hope." Children who stayed in the old house were enchanted by the garden's secret life. They crept out of bed just before midnight to watch the flowers bloom. One boy whispered that the petals hummed a lullaby, a gentle melody that made him feel safe and sleepy. A girl named Mira swore she saw a flower open shaped like a tiny star, which floated up to the moon and disappeared. Their stories became legends, whispered between siblings and friends, passed down in quiet moments beneath the covers. Scientists tried to unravel the garden's mystery. They measured soil and air, monitored temperatures, and charted blooming patterns. Yet, the garden remained a riddle. It refused to bloom in daylight, defying every known rule of botany. The flower's glow seemed to respond to something beyond the moon's light, a hidden pulse of time and silence. Despite their instruments, the scientists could not capture the garden's true magic. What the numbers failed to measure was the feeling, the deep calm, the soft wonder that came from witnessing something so rare and fragile. The garden was a place of healing. Visitors brought their burdens, sorrow, loss, confusion, and left a little lighter. The blooms whispered a promise. Even in darkness, life finds a way to bloom. It did not shout or demand. It simply was a quiet testament to resilience and hope. This was just the start of part 6. I'll continue writing the rest, unfolding the story in the same gentle tone until we reach the full length you want. The door that only opened when no one was watching. In the far end of the old house, beyond the hallway that bent like a lazy question mark, there was a door. Just a door. Plain wooden, painted the color of faded paper. Nothing carved, nothing marked. No name, no number, not even a lock. And yet, no one had ever seen it open. It stood in the same spot for decades, quietly blending into the shadows. The floor in front of it bore no heavy wear, no signs of recent use. The handle remained cool to the touch, untouched by time. But people noticed something strange. They would pass by the hallway, glance at the door closed. They'd turn away, speak to someone, or blink, and when they looked again, the door would be open just a crack. Never wide, never slammed, just barely open. And yet, no one had ever seen it move. The first person to write about it was a caretaker named Lenora. She lived in the house alone, keeping the dust away and the windows clean. She didn't believe in ghosts or magic, just drafts and creaky wood. But the door puzzled her. She would walk past it daily, always closed. And yet, every few nights, she would find it open. Just slightly. Enough for a sliver of darkness to peek through. She tried watching it. She sat for hours in a chair across the hallway, eyes fixed on the door. Nothing. She blinked. Just once. And there it was, ajar. She felt no breeze. No chill. No sound. Only a quiet, gentle shift, as if the house itself had taken a breath. Others tried to catch it in the act. A young filmmaker set up a camera. He adjusted the angle, ensured the lens was steady, and left it recording overnight. In the footage, the door remained closed. Until the moment he stepped into frame the next morning. He glanced at the camera, then toward the door. And when his eyes left it for 1 second to check the equipment, the door moved. Just a tiny shift. Enough to be different. Enough to be known. And when they rewound the tape, the movement wasn't there. Only the closed door. Unchanging. Unmoving. Silent. A little boy named Ion was the first to try something different. He didn't watch the door.
He spoke to it.
He sat on the floor with his back turned and said, "It's okay. I'm not looking." And slowly, he heard the tiniest creak. He smiled. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. When he got up, the door was wide open. Beyond it was a small room he had never seen before, dustless, clean, with a single chair facing the window. The view was of the garden, but not the garden they knew. This one bloomed under moonlight. No one else ever saw the same room. For some, when the door opened, it led to a spiral staircase descending into candlelit quiet. For others, it opened to a hall filled with clocks, all ticking in slow, synchronized rhythm. One woman swore she saw a library behind the door, a library of blank books that filled themselves only when she sat down. But none of them saw the door open. Not directly. Never. Only after turning away. Only after letting go. A psychologist named Dr. Farrell visited the house out of curiosity. He believed in perception and tricks of the eye. He thought the stories were exaggerations, perhaps born of old wood and tired minds. He spent 3 days in the hallway. He documented the door's position every hour. He marked the floor with chalk. He placed small objects against the frame. Nothing moved. Until the night he fell asleep in his chair. He awoke to silence. And the smell of lavender. The door was open. Inside, he found a journal. On the first page was his name. The rest of the pages were blank. Until he touched them. Then, words began to appear, his thoughts, his fears, his memories. Things he had forgotten. Things he hadn't yet admitted to himself. He closed the book gently and left it on the chair. When he returned the next day, the door was closed again. The book was gone. Some thought the door was alive. Not in the way people are, but in the way quiet things sometimes are. Observing, responding, caring, even in a way that had no need for words. A woman named Hira began visiting the hallway every evening. She never tried to open the door. She brought a cup of tea and sat with her back to it, humming softly. She said it made her feel less alone. And though she never entered whatever space was beyond it, she always said goodnight before she left. And every morning, a flower appeared beside her teacup.
Different each time.
Lavender. Jasmine. A blue bloom she could never name. She took them home and pressed them between pages. Not for proof, but for peace. The door became less of a mystery and more of a presence. It didn't need solving. It didn't need unlocking. It simply was. And in a world so eager for answers, the door offered a question. What might open when you finally stop trying to force it? When you sit quietly, with your back turned. When you trust that some things bloom only in the absence of attention. When you understand that not everything is meant to be known. Only experienced.
Quietly. Gently.
Alone. And maybe, just maybe, with your eyes closed. The clock that slept in daylight. There was a room in the eastern wing of the house that no one used anymore. Not because it was broken or cursed or dangerous, but because it held nothing except an old clock, tall, wooden, carved with winding vines and crescent moons. The kind of clock that looked like it had once belonged to a great hall or a quiet monastery where silence was more welcome than speech. It stood alone near the window, unmoving. Its face was soft with dust, its hands forever pointing to 7:14. The pendulum, long and brass, did not sway. It looked more like a statue than a machine. And by all appearances, it had not ticked in years. But it did. Just not during the day. No matter how many times someone tried to wind it, shake it, examine its gears, it would not move. But when night fell and silence settled like a quilt over the house, the clock began to breathe. Not loudly. Not suddenly. Just one soft tick, then another, and another. A rhythm so gentle, it was more like a heartbeat than a mechanism. And only then, in that perfect hush between midnight and sleep, did the clock begin to guide. The first person to notice was a librarian named Jonah. He came to the house for quiet, to finish a manuscript that had waited too long in his drawer. He took the eastern room for his study, not for the clock, but because it had a sturdy desk and a lamp that still worked. For days, he paid the clock no mind. But one evening, as he sat rereading a chapter, he noticed something.
A sound. Soft. Steady.
Familiar. Tick, tick, tick. He looked up. The hands had moved. They now pointed to 11:58. And just as the minute hand aligned with midnight, the air in the room shifted. It wasn't colder, just quieter. And the room, a room he thought he knew, felt suddenly older, like a memory gently resurfacing. Jonah closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, he wasn't sure what he saw, because the walls looked the same. But the light looked like candlelight, flickering from nowhere. And the floor creaked like footsteps were walking away. That night, Jonah dreamt of a library he'd visited as a boy. A place filled with the smell of oak and ink. A place that no longer existed. He dreamt of standing before a shelf and reaching for a book. He didn't remember the title, but he remembered how it felt to open it. Like waking up. The next morning, the clock read 7:14 again. And it was still. Other guests noticed the clock too. Not all of them. Only those who stayed up late. It never ticked before dark. But sometime after the world grew quiet, it would stir. And those who heard it always described the same thing. A gentle ticking that felt less like a countdown and more like a story unfolding, 1 second at a time. A girl named Zara, no older than 13, once entered the room by accident. She had followed a sound. Not music, not humming. Just presence. The door had been slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. The room was dim. The moon cast a soft square of light on the floor. The clock stood tall and quiet. But as Zara stepped forward, the hands moved. 11:59. She stood still. The ticking began. And with each tick, she remembered something, not from her own life, but from someone else's. A woman sewing by firelight. A child laughing on stone steps. A letter never sent, folded into a diary. She felt none of it as hers, and yet it all felt familiar. She backed away slowly, tears in her eyes, not from fear. From recognition. From the soft ache of knowing something lost had brushed against her. No one could explain the clock. Not engineers, not collectors, not antique experts. Its workings were ordinary. Springs, gears, weights. But no key could make it move. No tool could fix it. It ticked only for those who needed to hear. And only when no one expected it. One theory, passed quietly between visitors, was this. The clock kept time not by seconds, but by memory. That every tick was not a measurement, but a door. And that when it ticked for you, it meant something behind your thoughts had opened. Not loudly, not completely, but just enough to let something old come through. A woman named Mira, older than most who came to the house, once sat beside the clock and asked it a question aloud. She said, "If time remembers me, will I remember it?" The clock did not answer, but it ticked 3 times, and Mira closed her eyes. She later described what she saw, not in sleep, but in that quiet space between waking thoughts. She saw herself as a girl, walking with her grandmother through a field of dandelions. She saw the sky, the grass, the way her grandmother hummed a tune she hadn't heard since childhood. And she felt that humming wrap around her like the wind. There were other stories, too many to tell. A man who found peace after decades of silence. A woman who remembered her brother's voice for the first time in years. A boy who claimed the clock whispered lullabies from a place where the stars sleep. No one recorded it. No one solved it. They didn't need to. The clock wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be felt. And so it stood, still and silent by day, breathing gently by night, marking not hours, but hearts, not time, but memory, waiting not to be watched, but to be remembered. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the moon sits low, you might hear it too. Tick, tick, tick. Not just the sound of a clock, but the sound of something in you finally waking up. Something long buried. Something soft. Something safe. And maybe, just maybe, something you forgot you were waiting to remember. The forest that changed its path. There was a forest on the edge of the countryside, not too dense, not too wild. It wasn't the kind of place spoken of in ghost stories, nor was it feared or forbidden. But those who lived near it knew one thing: you didn't map it. And if you did, you didn't expect the map to stay the same. It had no name, this forest. Locals just called it Wojega, that place. And every 10 or so years, a new map would appear, etched into parchment, drawn in schoolbooks, even carved onto stone walls in forgotten barns. And none of them matched. At first, people assumed this was a mistake. Poor memory. Overgrown trails. Creative interpretation. But the forest disagreed. A historian named Alara once visited the region to study ancient paths. She carried with her a bundle of old maps dating back 200 years, each claiming to show the true path through the woods. When she first entered, it was early spring. The air was still cool, and small blossoms opened cautiously under the trees. She followed a trail marked on a map from 1842. It should have curved left toward a stone archway, then split in two. Instead, it went straight, then bent right. And after 20 minutes, she found herself before a wooden gate, one that didn't exist on any record she had. Painted in faded blue on the gate was a symbol, not a letter or number, but something that looked like a window drawn in the middle of a river. Alara stepped back, then forward. The gate opened on its own, and she walked through. She returned 6 hours later, with mud on her boots and a pressed flower tucked into her notebook. She didn't speak much of what happened inside, only that she had found something she'd forgotten she lost. And when asked if the map had helped her, she smiled gently. "No," she said. "But the forest did." A carpenter named Milo lived on the edge of the woods his entire life. As a boy, he used to run into the forest with his dog, never getting lost, never frightened. But as an adult, when he tried to return to the same paths, they were gone. The stream he used to cross had moved. The tall ash tree with the twisted trunk had vanished. And where once there had been a clearing, there was now a circle of stones, mossy, unmoving, and cold. He sat beside them one afternoon and whispered the names of friends he hadn't seen in decades. As he rose to leave, he found a smooth stone in his pocket. On it, carved in tiny lines, was the twisted trunk of the ash tree. The forest, it seemed, had remembered what he missed. There were stories like this everywhere. A woman who stepped into the woods after her husband passed, only to find a small bench with their initials carved freshly into it. A child who followed a rabbit through a thicket and came upon a locket their grandmother had lost long before they were born. A hiker who never took the same path twice, even when they tried, and always emerged in front of the exact place they needed to be. The forest, it seemed, did not forget, but it did rearrange. Cartographers stopped trying to chart it. Locals stopped asking for directions. Instead, they learned to walk without expectation, to carry not a compass, but a question, and to trust that the path they needed would appear, not the one they wanted. There was a story told by an old gardener named Rafik. He said he entered the forest once after a long illness. He didn't go in looking for anything. He just wanted silence. But what he found was a grove filled with white flowers that opened only at dusk. He sat there for what felt like hours. And when he stood up, his legs felt lighter, his breath easier. He returned the next day, and the next. But he never found the same grove again. "I think," he said, "the forest gave me what I needed, and then it closed the door." Some believed the forest was alive, not in a magical sense, but in the way memory is alive. That it carried the imprints of those who had walked it. That every trail was a response, not a fixture. And that the map changed because people changed. One winter, a girl named Lena came to the village. She was quiet, carried a small suitcase, and wore a red scarf that trailed behind her like a ribbon. She asked about the forest. The innkeeper said gently, Only go if you're willing to be lost. She nodded and went in the next morning. She didn't return that night, nor the next. But on the third day, as the snow fell in wide, soft flakes, she walked out, not from the path she had entered, but from the opposite edge of the village. She looked thinner, quieter, but she smiled, and in her hands she held a small drawing of her sister. Her sister, who had passed 3 years before. A drawing she hadn't made. She said nothing about the forest, only that she felt lighter. And she never went back. The forest still changes. Its paths never stay the same. And those who walk inside never return quite as they were. Not because they're broken, but because they were gently rearranged. Not forced. Not frightened. Just reminded that sometimes the map doesn't matter. Only the walk. Only the pause. Only the breath between trees that says, "You're not lost. You're just not where you thought you'd be." The house with one locked room. There was a house at the edge of the village, quiet, small, and always brushed with ivy. People passed by it daily, nodding politely, waving if they saw someone by the window. But no one ever entered. Not because they weren't welcome, but because there was a story about one room in the house, a room that had never been opened. Not since it was built. The house belonged to a woman named Anya. She had lived there all her life, alone, though not lonely. She tended her garden, fed the birds, kept her windows clean, and always offered a soft smile to passers-by. Children often ask their parents about the house. "Why doesn't anyone go in?" "The lady likes her quiet," came the gentle reply. "But what's in that one room?" "Some things don't need to be opened," the parents would say, and the children would nod, as if that made perfect sense. And it did, because even from the outside, you could tell. The room was different. It was at the very back of the house, with only one small window, always curtained. The door inside was made of dark oak, unlike the others, and it had no keyhole, only a smooth, cold knob that never turned. And Anya never spoke of it. Over the years, visitors came and went. Cousins from other towns, traveling artists, book collectors who knew Anya's shelves were filled with rarities. All were welcome in the house. Tea was served. Old music played softly. Stories were shared beside the fireplace. But no one was ever invited near the back hallway. And no one asked. One rainy evening, a young man named Idris came to the village. He was quiet, polite, and curious. The kind of curiosity that doesn't prod or pry, but listens longer than most. He stayed at the inn, walked the old paths, sketched trees, and bought worn books from the local shop. Everyone liked him. One day, he passed by Anya's house just as she was sweeping her porch. He offered to help. She smiled and handed him a second broom. It became a ritual. Every afternoon, Idris visited. Sometimes to help in the garden. Sometimes just to sit in the shade and listen to Anya's quiet stories about birds that nested near the windowsill, about winters long past, about flowers that only bloomed in moonlight. Weeks passed, and one day, over a pot of rosehip tea, Idris asked gently, "Have you always lived here?" Anya nodded. "Since I was a girl." "And has that room always been closed?" There was a pause. Anya looked down at her teacup. "Yes," she said simply. "Always." "But why?" She smiled, not coldly, but like someone remembering something from long ago. "Because it holds nothing," she said. "And everything." Idris didn't ask again, but his mind wandered. He began sketching the house, not the front but the back. He drew the window, with its quiet curtain. He imagined what might be behind it. Not treasure, not secrets, just space. A space untouched by time. One night, the wind howled louder than usual. Windows trembled. Lamps flickered. And Idris, unable to sleep, looked out toward the hills. A light,
Faint, steady,
coming from Anya's back window.
He watched for a long time.
The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. It just was. The next morning, he visited Anya. She looked tired, but peaceful. He didn't mention the light. And she didn't offer anything. They drank tea, and the day moved on. 1 month later, The village awoke to the sound of bells. Anya had passed. Quietly. In her sleep. There was a hush over the village, the kind that feels like snow. People brought flowers. Shared stories. Placed little wooden birds on her doorstep. And then came the question. What would happen to the house? No relatives came. No one was found. And so, the village decided, gently, to keep it as it was. They cleaned it. Preserved the garden. Let birds nest freely. But none of them touched the back room. The door remained closed. Until one day, when Idris, now staying longer in the village, walked to the house with a quiet heart. He stepped through the front door. The air inside was still warm, like a sigh. He walked slowly room by room, and finally stood before the oak door. He placed his hand on the knob. It turned. The door opened. Inside was not darkness, nor light, just stillness. A single chair, a shelf with one book, a vase with dried flowers, and a window, curtain drawn back, looking out over a hill Idris had never seen before. He stepped inside. It felt like stepping into a thought. Not one of his, but one that had been waiting for someone to sit with it. He sat and read the book. It had no title, just pages filled with short sentences, memories, and questions. Not answers, just gentle wonderings. Will anyone remember the way the sparrows danced? Is silence just another form of music? What do flowers dream of when no one is watching? Idris closed the book and placed it back. He stayed in the room until dusk. When he left, he didn't close the door. No one else entered after him, but the room remained open, waiting, not for someone curious, but for someone quiet, someone who understood that some rooms do not hide. They hold, not secrets, but echoes of things too soft to say aloud and too old to forget. To this day, the house still stands. Ivy growing slowly over its sides. The birds still sing. The windows still shine. And the room, that one room, remains as it always was. Not locked. Not empty. Just waiting. Like a pause at the end of a sentence. The kind of pause that tells you something mattered here, even if you don't know why. And perhaps that's the point. Some stories aren't told. They're kept. Until someone quiet enough comes along to hear them. Not solve them. Just sit with them. And listen. Softly. Completely. Like the wind behind a curtain. Or the sound of a room remembering itself. The soft unraveling. And now, dear listener, we reach the gentle close. Not an end, not a finish, but a pause long enough to feel what came before. The stories you've wandered through were not meant to be solved. They were meant to be sat beside. Like quiet companions in a room filled with dusted sunlight, they offered no answers, only presence. And sometimes that is enough. Over these hours, we've met forests that rearranged their paths. Rooms that stayed locked not to guard secrets, but to hold memories gently. Games that were played only once. Maps that never stayed the same. People who walked softly through places that remembered them more kindly than time ever could. What ties them together isn't action or drama, but something far smaller, and somehow much greater. A hush. A breath. The way the world shifts just slightly when you pay attention to what most people overlook. This kind of mystery doesn't knock loudly. It doesn't chase or shout. It doesn't demand. Instead, it invites. And those who answer do so not with questions, but with stillness. Each of these tales, whether about houses or hedgerows, diaries or doorways, was wrapped around a single, soft idea that the ordinary holds echoes. That silence is not absence. And that wonder doesn't have to sparkle, it can whisper, too. Think of the old woman, Anya, who kept a room closed not to hide something away, but because it was already whole just as it was. Think of Idris, who didn't force the door but waited, respected, listened. The room opened not when it was unlocked, but when someone came without an agenda. This, perhaps, is the heart of it. We spend our days searching for purpose, for truth, for closure. But sometimes, we don't need answers. We need stillness. We need a story that doesn't reach a peak, but rather drifts gently into thought, like fog over water. If you've been listening in the quiet, if your eyes are beginning to soften with sleep, then this is the space we share. Not a plot, not a twist, but a breath. In the hush that follows each sentence, something grows. A path may appear, or vanish. A memory may knock gently on the inside of your chest. You may think of someone, or no one, or everything. You may not remember these stories tomorrow, and that's okay, because they weren't meant to stay in your mind. They were meant to keep you company as you drifted toward your own quiet places, the kind that live between dreams and waking.
Between then and now.
Between the questions and the need to answer them. If your eyes are still open, let them soften. If your thoughts are still circling, let them slow. If your breath is shallow, let it deepen. You are not behind. You are not late. You are here. And here is enough. Thank you for walking these slow, meandering paths with me tonight. Thank you for letting the world soften. If this story held you, even for a moment, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, to leave a comment, or simply to return another night. You're always welcome here. In this quiet place where the stories do not need to roar, only rustle, like leaves, like paper, like dreams.
Good night.
Sleep well, and may your own forgotten rooms always open when the moment is right.